Welcome back to Archive Between Worlds. Today we descend into one of the most intricate and disturbing corporate conspiracies ever depicted in gaming history. For over a decade, the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise has captivated millions with its blend of atmospheric horror, cryptic storytelling, and layers upon layers of hidden lore. But beneath the surface of malfunctioning animatronics and jump scares lies something far more sinister. A story of systematic cover-ups, institutional denial, and a corporation so determined to protect its image that it has hidden literal murder within the walls of children's entertainment venues for generations. This is the complete story of Fazbear Entertainment's cover-ups. From the very first tragedy that set everything in motion, through decades of missing children, unexplained deaths, and supernatural horrors, all the way to the corporation's most audacious scheme of all, hiring game developers to turn their real atrocities into fictional entertainment, hoping the world would believe it was all just a silly horror story. We will examine every layer of deception, every corporate lie, every buried body and silenced witness that makes Fazbear Entertainment not just a fictional company, but a cautionary tale about what happens when profit matters more than human life. So settle in, because this journey spans decades, crosses between reality and the supernatural, and reveals a conspiracy so elaborate that even the victims themselves became unwitting participants in their own concealment. The foundation of dreams and nightmares. Every great tragedy begins with ambition. In the case of Fazbear Entertainment, that ambition belonged to two men who would become forever intertwined in a legacy of horror. William Afton and Henry Emily. These two entrepreneurs shared a vision in the 1970s, a time when the concept of animatronic entertainment was still finding its feet. They saw potential in bringing robotic characters to life for children's entertainment, envisioning a future where mechanical performers could bring joy to families across the nation. Their partnership seemed destined for success. Henry Emily was the creative genius, the engineer whose mind could translate dreams into mechanical reality. He possessed an almost intuitive understanding of robotics, capable of designing animatronics that moved with an uncanny fluidity that captivated children and adults alike. His creations weren't merely machines. They were characters brought to life, each movement carefully choreographed to evoke wonder and delight. William Afton, on the other hand, was the business mind. He understood finances, marketing, expansion, and the sometimes ruthless calculations necessary to build an empire. Where Henry saw art, William saw opportunity. Where Henry imagined children's laughter, William calculated profit margins. This dynamic would prove essential to their early success, but it also planted seeds that would grow into something monstrous. Together, they founded Fredbear's Family Diner, a modest establishment that would become the genesis of everything that followed. The diner featured two animatronic characters that would define the brand: Fredbear, a golden bear who served as the primary mascot, and Spring Bonnie, a golden rabbit companion. These weren't ordinary animatronics. They represented William's most significant technical contribution to the partnership: Springlock technology. Springlock suits were revolutionary in concept, allowing the animatronic endoskeleton to be wound back against the walls of the costume using a hand crank, creating enough space for a human performer to wear the suit. This dual-purpose design meant that the same character children saw performing on stage could also walk among them, interact with them personally, maintaining the magical illusion that Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were truly alive. The technology was ingenious, innovative, and as we would later learn, extraordinarily dangerous. The early days of Fredbear's Family Diner were marked by genuine success. Families flocked to see the singing bear and his rabbit companion. Birthday parties were booked months in advance. William and Henry watched their dream transform into reality, their partnership seemingly unbreakable. Henry would often don the Fredbear suit himself, walking among the children, waving and posing for photographs.
William preferred Spring Bonnie, the rabbit's wide grin becoming almost synonymous with the man inside it. But even in these early, seemingly innocent days, something dark was brewing within William Afton.
What drove him to eventually become one of the most prolific murderers in the franchise's history remains one of the great mysteries of the lore. Some speculate that tragedy broke him. Others suggest that the darkness was always there, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. What we know for certain is that Fredbear's family diner would eventually become the birthplace of horrors that would echo through decades of cover-ups and corporate lies. The company's expansion was swift.
The success of Fredbear's Family Diner led to the creation of Fazbear Entertainment as a formal corporate entity, paving the way for larger venues, more animatronics, and a franchise model that would spread their particular brand of entertainment across multiple locations. New characters were developed. Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate.
Each was designed by Henry Emily, each imbued with the same mechanical excellence that had made Fredbear so popular. This expansion should have been cause for celebration. Yet, as the company grew, so too did the opportunities for William Afton's true nature to manifest. The very springlock suits that had been created for innocent entertainment would become tools of murder. The children's venues that were meant to provide joy would become killing grounds. And a corporation that could have been a beloved institution would instead become one of the most corrupt organizations in fiction, willing to cover up any atrocity to protect its bottom line.
The first crack in Fazbear Entertainment's facade of innocence came not from William Afton's deliberate malice, but from his first victim, a child named Charlotte Emily, the daughter of his own business partner and friend. This murder represents the original sin from which all subsequent horrors would flow, and understanding it is essential to comprehending the depths to which the cover-ups would eventually descend.
Charlotte Emily was, by all accounts, a kind and gentle soul. The daughter of Henry Emily, she grew up surrounded by her father's creations, watching with wonder as he brought mechanical characters to life in his workshop. She knew the animatronics not as frightening machines, but as friends, characters her father had crafted with love and care. This innocent trust would make her the perfect victim for a predator who had already begun his descent into darkness. The exact circumstances of Charlotte's death have been revealed through various games in the franchise, most notably through the Take Cake to the Children minigame in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and the security puppet minigame in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. What we know paints a picture of calculated cruelty and tragic circumstance. Charlotte was locked outside of Fredbear's family diner, crying and alone when William Afton found her. His vehicle, often depicted in purple to match his later designation as the Purple Guy, pulled up alongside the frightened child. What happened next would forever alter the course of Fazbear Entertainment's history. William murdered Charlotte Emily, leaving her body in the alley behind the restaurant. The puppet, an animatronic that Henry had designed specifically with safety features meant to protect children, malfunctioned due to the rain and moisture, crawling out to where Charlotte lay. In one of the franchise's most poignant moments, the puppet reached the dying child, cradling her small form as she drew her final breaths. It was in this moment that something supernatural occurred, something that would define the franchise's mythology. Charlotte's spirit merged with the puppet, possessing it, becoming one with the animatronic her father had created.
For Fazbear Entertainment, this murder presented the first major crisis requiring corporate concealment. How do you explain the death of your co-founder's daughter at your own establishment?
The answer, it seems, was to deflect, minimize, and obscure.
The official explanation, suggested through various pieces of lore, was that the puppet had somehow malfunctioned and that Charlotte's death was a tragic accident rather than deliberate murder. No suspect was ever charged.
No investigation appeared to produce results. The company continued operating as if nothing had happened.
This established the template that Fazbear Entertainment would follow repeatedly in the years to come. When tragedy struck, the corporation's first instinct was not to seek justice or protect future victims, but to protect the brand. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing was avoided at all costs. Technical malfunctions and unfortunate accidents became the go-to explanations for events that were, in reality, deliberate murders. The safety of children was secondary to the preservation of profit and public image. For Henry Emily, Charlotte's death represented a wound that would never fully heal. The lore suggests that he withdrew from active involvement in Fazbear Entertainment for years, consumed by grief and guilt. He had created the puppet to protect children, and it had failed to save his own daughter. The cruel irony was that Charlotte, now possessing the puppet, would go on to become a protector of other murdered children, giving life to their spirits, just as her father had given life to the animatronics. But this supernatural development was unknown to most, hidden within the very machines that continued to entertain unsuspecting families. The murder of Charlotte Emily also marked the beginning of William Afton's career as a serial killer. Having successfully murdered once without consequence, having witnessed the corporation's willingness to cover up rather than confront, William understood that he operated within a system that would protect him. The spring-lock suits provided perfect concealment for luring victims. The animatronics provided places to hide bodies. And the company's dedication to protecting its image meant that investigations would never probe too deeply. William Afton had found his hunting ground, and Fazbear Entertainment had unknowingly become his accomplice. The bite of 1983, when family becomes tragedy. If Charlotte Emily's murder represented William Afton's first external victim, the bite of 1983 brought tragedy directly into his own home. This incident, witnessed during the minigames of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, reveals a cascade of dysfunction within the Afton family that would contribute to the horrors yet to come, while also providing another incident that required corporate concealment. William Afton had 3 children: his oldest son Michael, his daughter Elizabeth, and his youngest son, known in the community primarily as the Crying Child, or sometimes identified as Evan Afton. The Crying Child lived in constant terror of his father's creations, while other children delighted in Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. The Crying Child saw only monsters. Whether this fear stemmed from witnessing something he shouldn't have at the restaurant, from his father's increasingly unstable behavior, or from some intuitive understanding of the danger these animatronics represented, remains a subject of debate among lore enthusiasts. What is not debated is the cruelty visited upon him by his older brother Michael. The relationship between these siblings was toxic from the start. Michael, wearing a foxy mask to frighten his younger brother, tormented the Crying Child relentlessly. He would jump out from hiding places, exploit his brother's fears, and seem to take genuine pleasure in the terror he caused. This bullying escalated. On the Crying Child's birthday, an event that was supposed to be a celebration, but became instead a death sentence. At Fredbear's family diner, surrounded by the animatronics he feared most, the Crying Child was grabbed by Michael and his friends. They thought it would be hilarious to bring the terrified child closer to Fredbear, to force him to confront his fears in the most traumatic way possible. They lifted him up, carrying his struggling, crying form toward the golden bear on stage. In a moment of cruel mockery, they shoved his head into Fredbear's mouth, joking about giving him a big kiss from his favorite character. Then the animatronic's jaws closed.
The spring lock mechanisms, already notorious for their dangerous potential, may have been triggered by moisture from the child's tears. The mechanical jaws clamped down with crushing force on the crying child's skull. The laughter turned to screams. The birthday party became a crime scene. And Fazbear Entertainment faced another crisis that threatened to expose the fundamental dangers of their operations. The crying child survived the initial bite, but succumbed to his injuries, passing away in a hospital bed while his brother apologized tearfully, promising to put him back together. This death, unlike Charlotte's murder, couldn't be attributed to William Afton's direct actions. It was, in a horrible way, an accident caused by bullying children and faulty equipment. But it was an accident that never should have happened. An accident that highlighted the inherent dangers of spring-lock technology that the company had known about but chosen to ignore. Fazbear Entertainment's response to the bite of 1983 established another pattern in their cover-up strategy: the strategic closure and rebranding. Fredbear's Family Diner closed its doors following the incident. The spring-lock suits were retired from use, sealed away in back rooms designated as safe rooms that were hidden from cameras and eventually blocked off entirely. The company restructured, refocused on its Freddy Fazbear's Pizza brand, and carried on as if Fredbear's had never existed. The dangerous technology wasn't eliminated. It was simply hidden. Phone Guy, the mysterious employee who would later guide players through the games via recorded messages, references these events in his training tapes found in Five Nights at Freddy's 3. He mentions an unfortunate incident at a sister location that led to the retirement of the springlock suits. Note the careful language. Unfortunate incident rather than child's death. Sister location rather than naming Fredbear's directly. Even in internal communications, Fazbear Entertainment was careful to obscure the truth, to maintain plausible deniability, to distance itself from the consequences of its own negligence. For William Afton, the death of his youngest son had complex implications that the law only partially reveals. Some interpretations suggest this loss, combined with the company's willingness to cover it up rather than acknowledge systemic problems, pushed William further into his murderous obsessions. Others proposed that William's experiments with Remnant, the supernatural substance tied to souls and animatronics, were motivated by a desire to somehow restore his lost child. Whatever the psychological impact, the practical outcome was clear. William Afton continued killing, and Fazbear Entertainment continued covering up. The Bite of 1983 also introduces the concept of possession more explicitly into the franchise's mythology. The crying child's fate after death remains debated, with theories ranging from him becoming Golden Freddy to him being the source of the nightmare animatronics that would plague later games. What is certain is that his death added another restless spirit to the growing supernatural community, haunting Fazbear Entertainment's properties. Children's entertainment venues were becoming graveyards for lost souls, and the company's refusal to acknowledge this meant that more deaths were inevitable. June 26, 1985, stands as the darkest date in Fazbear Entertainment's blood-soaked history. On this day, at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location in Hurricane, Utah, 5 children vanished during a birthday party. This event, known as the Missing Children Incident, would become the central tragedy around which the entire Five Nights at Freddy's mythology revolves. It represents both William Afton's most ambitious killing spree and Fazbear Entertainment's most elaborate cover-up operation. The victims were 5 innocent children who had simply come to enjoy a birthday celebration at what should have been a safe, family-friendly establishment. Their names, revealed through various games and supplementary materials, were
Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. Each of these children had families who would never see them again, who would spend years wondering what had happened to their loved ones, who would never receive the closure of knowing where their children's bodies lay. William Afton's method was as simple as it was diabolical. He donned one of the company's mascot costumes, likely Spring Bonnie, given his familiarity with that suit, and used his position of trust to lure children away from the public areas of the restaurant.
The costume transformed him from a potential threat into a beloved character, a figure that children were conditioned to approach without fear. Parents saw a restaurant employee entertaining guests, not a predator hunting prey.
The very systems meant to create a magical experience for children became the tools of their destruction. One by one, the children were led to a back room. The newspaper clippings that players can discover in the original Five Nights at Freddy's described children being lured during the late hours of operation, when the restaurant was less crowded and supervision less vigilant. Susie, based on later revelations, was apparently told that Afton had found her lost dog, a cruel manipulation of a child's love for their pet. The others were presumably promised similar treats or surprises, special access to see the animatronics up close, or any number of innocent-sounding reasons to follow a friendly character away from the crowd. What happened in that back room was murder. 5 children killed by a man in a rabbit costume. Their lives ended before they had truly begun. But the horror didn't end with their deaths. William Afton, whether to hide evidence or due to some twisted ritualistic impulse, stuffed the children's bodies into the animatronic suits of Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and what would later be known as Golden Freddy. The victims became one with the machines, their corpses hidden within the very attractions that children would continue to enjoy, blissfully unaware of what lurked inside. The aftermath of these murders reveals just how far Fazbear Entertainment was willing to go to protect its business. According to the newspaper clippings scattered throughout the first game, a suspect was identified through security camera footage and arrested. Yet the children's bodies were never found. And without bodies, prosecution became difficult. The suspect was eventually released due to lack of evidence. Whether this suspect was William Afton himself or some unfortunate individual caught in the wrong place at the wrong time remains a point of lore discussion. What is undeniable is that the actual killer went free. But the bodies weren't gone. They were hidden in plain sight inside the animatronics that continue to perform daily for families. And nature has a way of revealing what we try to hide. The decomposing corpses within the suits began to affect the machines. Parents started noticing strange odors emanating from the animatronics. The beloved mascots began to emit what the newspapers described as a foul odor, so severe that the health department became involved. Blood and mucus were observed leaking from the eyes and mouths of the characters. One particularly disturbed parent compared the animatronics to reanimated carcasses, a description more accurate than they could have known. Consider the corporate calculus happening behind the scenes. Fazbear Entertainment knew, or should have known, that something was horrifically wrong with their animatronics. The smell of death is unmistakable. Blood seeping from mechanical costumes doesn't have an innocent explanation. Yet rather than thoroughly investigating, rather than shutting down immediately to determine the cause, the company attempted to continue operations. The newspaper clippings mentioned that the restaurant was threatened again with shutdown by the health department, implying multiple warnings had been issued and ignored. The phrase, "again," suggests a pattern of violations and near closures. A company that was repeatedly caught endangering public health and repeatedly given chances to continue. How many health inspectors were paid off? How many complaints were dismissed? How many employees were ordered to keep quiet? The lore doesn't give us specific details,
but the implications are damning. Fazbear Entertainment prioritized continued operation over public safety, over justice for murdered children, over basic human decency. Eventually, the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location was forced to close. The newspaper clipping announcing this closure mentions a long struggle to stay in business after the tragedy that took place there many years ago. The CEO's statement that these characters will live on in the hearts of kids takes on a macabre double meaning when we understand that the characters literally contain the remains of children. It's a message that could be read as innocent corporate optimism, or as a sick joke by a company that knew exactly what their animatronics contained. What makes the missing children incident particularly insidious from a cover-up perspective is how successfully the crime was obscured. 5 children disappeared. A suspect was arrested, but released. No bodies were ever officially recovered. The restaurant closed, but the company continued. The animatronics containing the bodies were likely refurbished and reused, their mechanical systems cleaned and updated while the supernatural possession that had taken hold remained. The children never received funerals. Their families never received answers. And Fazbear Entertainment marched on, rebranding and reopening as if nothing had happened. The supernatural element adds another dimension to the cover-up. The spirits of the murdered children didn't simply rest within the animatronics. They became active, vengeful, and confused. Charlotte Emily, still possessing the puppet, apparently played a role in enabling the other children's souls to bond with the animatronics that held their bodies. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 depicts this process, showing the puppet placing masks on the fallen children, binding their spirits to the mechanical forms that will become their eternal prisons. These possessed animatronics began exhibiting strange behavior that would become the basis for the entire gameplay of the franchise. They became aggressive at night, wandering the restaurant, seeking what they believed to be their killer. The children's confused spirits couldn't distinguish between the man who murdered them and any adult in a uniform who might be that man. Every night, security guard became a potential target. Not out of malice, but out of a desperate, misguided desire for vengeance against the purple guy who had stolen their lives. Fazbear Entertainment's response to this supernatural activity was, predictably, to deny and deflect. The official explanation, relayed through phonei in the original game, was that the animatronics were left in free-roaming mode at night to prevent their servos from locking up. If they encountered a person, they would simply interpret that person as an endoskeleton without a costume and attempt to help by stuffing them into a spare suit. The violent deaths of night guards were framed as unfortunate accidents caused by the animatronics' programming, not as supernatural vengeance carried out by murdered children. This explanation served multiple purposes for the cover-up. It provided a technical rationale for the animatronics' nighttime behavior, eliminating the need to acknowledge anything supernatural. It shifted blame from the company to the animatronics themselves, making the machines responsible rather than the organization that owned them. And it maintained the fiction that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was a safe family establishment that simply had some quirky after-hours protocols. Night guards were warned about the danger but assured it was manageable. They were given tools to defend themselves, doors that could be closed, cameras to monitor movement. The subtext was clear. Any deaths would be the guards' fault for not following protocol, not the company's fault for operating a literal death trap. The paychecks received by night guards in the first game reveal another layer of corporate malfeasance. The payment is absurdly low, barely above minimum wage, for a job that involves life-threatening danger. The disclaimer on hiring forms mentions that Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for death or dismemberment, language that would be utterly insane for a legitimate children's entertainment company, but makes perfect sense for an organization that knows its employees are likely to be murdered. The cheap pay, combined with the liability waivers, suggests a company that views night guards as expendable, hiring whoever was desperate enough to take the job and not particularly caring if they survived. The closure of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza should have been the end of the story. A sensible corporation would have dissolved its owners facing criminal investigation, its brand forever tainted by association with missing children. But Fazbear Entertainment was not a sensible corporation. It was an entity seemingly incapable of learning from its mistakes, driven by some combination of greed, denial, and possibly William Afton's continued influence to persist, despite overwhelming evidence that it should cease to exist. In 1987, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened its doors. This location, featured in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, represented the company's attempt at rehabilitation. New animatronics were developed, sleeker and more child-friendly than their predecessors. These toy versions of the classic characters were designed with the latest technology, including facial recognition software tied to a criminal database. Children could interact with them directly, and the animatronics would scan faces to identify any registered sex offenders in the building. On paper, it was a genuine attempt at improving safety. In practice, it was window dressing over a fundamentally corrupted foundation. The old animatronics, the ones that contain the remains and spirits of the missing children, weren't destroyed. They were kept in a back room designated for parts and service, their deteriorating forms serving as spare components for the new models. This decision defies any reasonable interpretation of corporate responsibility. The animatronics that had been surrounded by blood, mucus, and foul odors. The machines that were literally described as resembling reanimated carcasses. These weren't incinerated or subjected to forensic investigation. They were stored in the same building where children would continue to play, their possessed forms still wandering the halls at night. Phone Guy's messages during Five Nights at Freddy's 2 reveal the company's ongoing pattern of denial. He mentions that someone has been using the old yellow suit, presumably Spring Bonnie, in the back rooms. He notes that the company is facing investigation, but assures the player that it will all blow over. He mentions the incident at the sister location that led to the retirement of Springlock suits, still using euphemistic language to avoid directly acknowledging that a child died. Throughout his messages, Phone Guy comes across as either willfully ignorant or actively complicit in the cover-up, a company man who follows the official line no matter how absurd it becomes. The bite of 1987 occurred at this location, adding another layer to Fazbear Entertainment's catalog of disasters. Unlike the bite of 1983, which happened at Fredbear's and involved the Springlock suits, the bite of 1987 was inflicted by one of the animatronics during regular operation. Phone Guy mentions this incident in the first game, noting that the victim lived, but lost their frontal lobe. The identity of both the victim and the attacking animatronic remained subjects of debate, with popular theories suggesting that Mangle, one of the toy animatronics that had been disassembled and reassembled by children into a twisted mess of parts, was responsible. The corporate response to the bite of 1987 was characteristically insufficient. Rather than shutting down and acknowledging that their animatronics were fundamentally dangerous, Fazbear Entertainment restricted the character's ability to roam during the day. The official explanation was that this would prevent further incidents, while still allowing the animatronics to move at night to prevent servo lockup. Once again, a half measure designed to maintain business operations took precedence over genuine safety reform. The animatronics could still attack night guards with impunity, They just couldn't bite customers during business hours. The 1987 location closed shortly after these events, with the toy animatronics being scrapped. But the pattern had been established beyond any reasonable doubt. Fazbear Entertainment was an organization that would never voluntarily cease operations no matter how many people were harmed. Tragedies were explained away.
Evidence was hidden or destroyed. Employees were silenced or replaced.
And through it all, the company continued to open new locations, to serve new families, to place new children in the proximity of possessed, dangerous machines. What's particularly chilling about the 1987 period is the revelation that William Afton was still active.
Phone guy's mention of someone using the yellow suit in the back suggests that Afton was continuing his predatory behavior even as the company was under investigation. The man responsible for the missing children incident was still employed, still had access to the facilities, still had the tools and opportunity to commit murder.
Fazbear Entertainment either didn't know the identity of its killer, or, more disturbingly, knew and did nothing. Either interpretation reveals a corporation so dysfunctional that it couldn't or wouldn't protect the children in its care.
While Fazbear Entertainment served as the public face of children's entertainment, William Afton was building something else entirely. Afton Robotics, his personal company, operated in the shadows, developing technology that went far beyond what was publicly known.
This parallel operation represents another layer of the cover-up, a hidden infrastructure designed to advance Afton's murderous research while maintaining plausible deniability for Fazbear Entertainment. The most significant creation of Afton Robotics was the line of Funtime animatronics, designed for a venue called Circus Baby's Pizza World.
These animatronics represented a technological leap beyond anything seen in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations. They were sleeker, more advanced, and hiding a sinister secret. They were specifically designed to capture and contain children.
Circus Baby, the centerpiece of this new venue, was a sophisticated animatronic with a clown-like appearance designed to appeal to children. She could count the number of children in a room, dispense ice cream as a lure, and was equipped with a claw mechanism in her stomach designed to grab and pull children inside.
The blueprints for these animatronics, visible in later games, reveal storage tanks and other mechanisms clearly intended for storing bodies rather than any legitimate entertainment purpose. William's own daughter, Elizabeth Afton, became a victim of this technology. Despite her father's warnings to stay away from Circus Baby, Elizabeth was drawn to the colorful animatronic. In a moment when she was alone with Baby, the animatronic's programming activated. The claw grabbed Elizabeth and pulled her into the machine, killing her. This tragedy, the murder of his own daughter by a machine he created for murder, should have been a moment of reckoning for William Afton. Instead, it seems to have accelerated his descent into madness. Circus Baby's Pizza World never opened to the public. The official explanation, revealed through news reports within the game's lore, was that the venue closed due to gas leaks. This excuse is remarkably convenient, providing a technical reason for closure that requires no investigation into the true cause. No one asks uncomfortable questions about gas leaks. No one demands to see the animatronics or investigate the premises. The cover story allowed Afton Robotics to quietly shut down its public-facing operation while continuing its work underground. And underground is literal in this case. The Funtime animatronics were relocated to an underground facility called Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, where they were available for rent at private events. This business model served multiple sinister purposes. It kept the dangerous animatronics away from permanent venues where patterns might be noticed. It gave the machines access to private homes and events where supervision was minimal, and it provided a legitimate-seeming business cover for what was actually a mobile murder operation. The events of Five Nights at Freddy's sister location take place in this underground facility, where the player, later revealed to be Michael Afton, descends to investigate what happened to his sister Elizabeth. The game reveals the grotesque nature of the Funtime animatronics through their own commentary and through the horrific situations the player encounters. The Scooper, a device designed to remove the endoskeleton from an animatronic, is shown to have more sinister applications. The animatronics themselves are revealed to be plotting escape, culminating in their combination into a creature called Enard that literally wears Michael's body as a skin suit. For Fazbear Entertainment, the connection to Afton Robotics represents a liability they have worked hard to obscure. The game suggests that the parent company knew about or was involved in Afton's side operations, but the exact relationship remains deliberately unclear. This ambiguity itself is a form of cover-up. By keeping the connection murky, Fazbear Entertainment can deny direct responsibility for whatever atrocities Afton Robotics committed, while still benefiting from its technological innovations. The concept of remnant emerges from this period of the lore, representing William Afton's research into the supernatural properties of the possessed animatronics. Remnant is the substance that allows spirits to inhabit physical objects, and Afton's experiments sought to harvest and manipulate this substance for unknown purposes. Some theories suggest he wanted to achieve immortality. Others propose he was simply fascinated by the supernatural and wanted to understand it. Whatever his motivation, these experiments required victims, and his murder spree continued unabated. The existence of this parallel operation demonstrates that the cover-up extended beyond simple corporate image management into active criminal conspiracy. Fazbear Entertainment wasn't just failing to investigate murders. It was, at minimum, turning a blind eye to a subsidiary operation specifically designed to commit them. The Springlock suits had been one thing. Dangerous technology that happened to facilitate murder. The Funtime animatronics was something else entirely. Machines purpose-built to kill children, hidden beneath a veneer of entertainment. For decades, William Afton operated with impunity, his crimes hidden by a corporation more interested in profits than justice, and his identity protected by the Springlock suits that made him appear to be just another friendly mascot. But even the most cunning predator eventually faces consequences. Though in Afton's case, death proved to be merely a transformation rather than an ending. The events depicted in the Follow Me minigames of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 show what happened when William Afton returned to a closed Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, presumably to destroy evidence of his crimes. The animatronics, still possessed by the spirits of the children he murdered, were waiting. Perhaps he thought that dismantling the machines would finally free him from their haunting presence. Perhaps he simply wanted to eliminate the physical evidence of bodies that might still be traced to him. Whatever his reasoning, he systematically destroyed the classic animatronics, tearing them apart one by one. But the spirits were not so easily defeated. Freed from their mechanical prisons, the ghostly forms of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy cornered their murderer in a back room. The safe room, ironically designated as a place of security for employees, became the stage for supernatural justice. Desperate to escape the approaching specters, William donned the one thing he thought could save him: the Spring Bonnie suit, his old costume, the disguise he had worn to commit his crimes. It was a fatal mistake. The Springlock mechanisms, unstable after years of neglect, failed catastrophically. The metal components that had been wound back to allow human entry snapped forward with violent force, piercing William Afton's body from every direction. The springs impaled his organs, crushed his bones, and began the slow process of killing him. In his dying moments, trapped within the very suit that had enabled his murders, William Afton collapsed to the floor of the safe room, his blood mixing with the mechanical fluids, of Spring Bonnie. The room was sealed, whether by the children's spirits, by the deteriorating building, or by some deliberate act of concealment. The safe room became William Afton's tomb. For approximately 30 years, he lay there, his body decomposing within the suit, his spirit somehow anchored to the animatronic form he had died in. This was not the peaceful death of a natural life concluded. It was the beginning of a new nightmare. When Fazbear Entertainment eventually closed for what appeared to be the final time, the properties sat abandoned. The animatronics were left to rust and decay. The buildings crumbled, and William Afton's remains merged ever more completely with the Spring Bonnie suit, creating the entity that would later be known as Springtrap. The distinction between man and machine blurred into something new. A walking corpse, a possessed animatronic, a killer who had transcended death itself. The cover-up during this period was passive but effective. The closed Freddy's locations were simply abandoned, their secrets sealed within deteriorating walls. No investigations were conducted. No attempts were made to locate missing persons or solve decades-old cold cases. Fazbear Entertainment, as a corporate entity, seemed to have died with its properties, leaving behind only urban legends and rumored hauntings. The truth remained hidden, not through active concealment, but through neglect. The passing of time burying secrets more effectively than any deliberate scheme could have. 3 decades passed before Fazbear Entertainment resurfaced, this time in a form that reveals just how shameless the organization truly was. In 2023, a group of entrepreneurs decided to capitalize on the dark legends surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza by creating a horror attraction called Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. Rather than leaving the franchise's horrific history buried, they chose to exhume it for profit. Fazbear's Fright was designed as a walk-through horror experience, decorated with authentic artifacts salvaged from the original pizzerias. The creators scoured abandoned locations for anything that might enhance the attraction's authenticity. Old animatronic parts, faded posters, dusty arcade machines. They approached this process with the enthusiasm of treasure hunters, oblivious to the genuine horrors they were unearthing. One of these treasure hunters, known in the game as Phone Dude, recorded enthusiastic messages about the genuinely creepy items they were finding. Then, they found Springtrap. The discovery of an actual animatronic in one of the sealed safe rooms should have prompted immediate investigation. This was, after all, a suit containing human remains, evidence of a crime that had never been solved. But Fazbear's Fright's operators saw only a centerpiece for their attraction. They brought Springtrap into their venue, posed it in their halls, and prepared to charge admission to visitors who would walk past a literal crime scene without ever knowing. The events of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 follow from this catastrophically bad decision. The player, a night security guard for Fazbear's Fright, must survive a week of shifts, while Springtrap, now active and aware, hunts through the attraction. The horror has come full circle. The man who murdered children in rabbit costume has become a murderous rabbit animatronic, stalking new victims in a venue designed to celebrate the very crimes he committed. The cover-up at Fazbear's Fright was less about concealing specific incidents and more about the fundamental obscenity of the entire enterprise. The attraction's existence represented a corporation profiting from tragedy, turning murdered children into entertainment and literally displaying the murderer as an attraction. The families of the missing children, if any still lived, might have attended Fazbear's Fright and walked past the very creature that killed their loved ones, never knowing the truth. Springtrap's presence also introduced a supernatural element that the attraction's operators were completely unprepared for.
The phantom animatronics that appear throughout the game, spectral versions of the classic characters, suggest that the building itself had become haunted. Whether these phantoms were manifestations of the children's spirits, projections from Springtrap's disturbed consciousness, or something else entirely, they demonstrated that the horrors of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza could not be safely commodified. The past refused to stay buried. Fazbear's fright burned down at the end of the game.
A newspaper clipping shown after completing Night 6 mentions the fire and notes that anything salvaged from the attraction would be auctioned off.
The deliberately vague language suggests that Springtrap may have survived the flames, and indeed, a hidden image visible when brightening the newspaper shows the animatronic's face still intact. Fire, it seems, was insufficient to destroy what William Afton had become. This fire might have been accidental, or it might have been deliberate. Some interpretations suggest that the Night Guard, having survived a week of being hunted by a dead serial killer in robot form, decided to end the nightmare permanently. Others propose supernatural intervention, the spirits finally taking action to destroy their tormentor. Whatever the cause, the fire represents a moment when the cover-up could have ended, when authorities investigating the blaze might have discovered human remains inside an animatronic and finally solved the missing children case. But the cover-up persisted. The newspaper treats the fire as a minor local interest story, not a potential crime scene. The mention of auctioning off salvaged items suggests that even after the destruction, there was no serious investigation into what Fazbear's fright had contained. The pattern held. Fazbear Entertainment properties could burn, collapse, or be abandoned, and no one would ask the necessary questions. Henry Emily had been absent from the franchise for most of its history, a ghostly presence mentioned in supplementary materials but never directly encountered. His daughter's murder and his partner's betrayal had broken something in him, driving him away from the company he had helped create. But as the years passed and the horrors multiplied, Henry came to understand that passive withdrawal wasn't enough. William Afton had to be stopped permanently, and the tortured souls trapped in the animatronics had to be freed. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the sixth main entry in the franchise, reveals Henry's elaborate trap. Under the guise of starting a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza franchise, Henry established a location specifically designed to attract the remaining possessed animatronics. The player, functioning as a franchise manager, is tasked with building and operating a restaurant while also salvaging any animatronics that appear in the back alley. These aren't random discoveries, they're deliberate targets. The animatronics that appear for salvage represent the remaining threads of the franchise's supernatural horror. Molten Freddy, the deteriorated form of Ennard still containing parts of the Funtime animatronics and possibly some essence of the missing children. Scrap Baby, the rebuilt form of Circus Baby containing Elizabeth Afton's spirit. Lefty, an animatronic secretly created by Henry to contain and transport the puppet, and thus Charlotte's spirit. And Scrap Trap, William Afton himself, the charred but still animate form of Springtrap. The salvage process as presented to the player is supposedly about recovering valuable parts. The reality, revealed in the game's true ending, is far more significant. Henry is gathering every possessed animatronic, every restless spirit, every piece of his and William's shared legacy into a single location. The restaurant isn't just a business. It's a crematorium designed for a very specific purpose. Henry's voice, heard through cassette recordings throughout the game, gradually reveals the scope of his plan. In the Insanity ending, triggered by accessing hidden blueprints, he speaks directly about his guilt and his determination to end what he helped create. He describes the animatronics as being in prisons of my own creation, acknowledging his role in building the machines that would come to house murdered souls.
He speaks of considered suicide, of years of wrestling with what he knew, of finally finding the resolve to act. The true ending of Pizzeria Simulator is one of the most significant moments in the franchise's history. Henry initiates a fire protocol, locking down the building with himself, the animatronics, and the player inside. His speech, delivered as flames rise and the temperature climbs, addresses each of the spirits trapped within the machines. To the missing children, he offers peace. He tells them that for most of them, there is rest waiting beyond the smoke, an afterlife where they can finally be free. To Elizabeth Afton, trapped in Scrap Baby, he speaks with something almost resembling sympathy, acknowledging that she may not even remember her own name after so many years of possession. To the player, revealed to be Michael Afton in most interpretations, he acknowledges their willing sacrifice, noting that there was a way out, but knowing Michael wouldn't take it. And to William Afton, his former friend and partner, Henry has only condemnation. Although for one of you, he says, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. This is judgment pronounced after decades of waiting. A final severing of the bond between the two men who created Fazbear Entertainment. Henry also addresses his daughter Charlotte, the first victim, whose spirit in the puppet he has finally recovered through Lefty. He apologizes that no one was there to save her on the day she died, acknowledges her role in giving life to the other children's spirits, and promises that he's finally fulfilling his duty to protect her. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours. The pizzeria burns. The animatronics are destroyed. The spirits, presumably, find their rest. Henry, Michael, and the trapped souls all perish in flames, intended to finally end the nightmare. And with them presumably dies the Fazbear Entertainment legacy itself. The cover-up should end here, with nothing left to cover up. But of course, it doesn't. The brilliance of Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted lies in how it transforms the cover-up into a metatextual commentary on the franchise itself. In this game, released for virtual reality platforms, Fazbear Entertainment isn't just continuing to exist despite the events of Pizzeria Simulator. It's actively trying to rewrite history. The game's premise, revealed through tutorial dialogue and hidden cassette recordings, establishes that the Freddy Fazbear brand has survived as a corporate entity. More than that, the company has become aware of its reputation problems. The urban legends, the rumors about missing children, the stories of haunted animatronics, all of this has seeped into public consciousness to the point where it threatens the brand's viability. Fazbear Entertainment needed a way to address these rumors without acknowledging their truth. Their solution was audacious. Hire an independent game developer to create horror games based on the rumors surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. These games, quite obviously standing in for the actual Five Nights at Freddy's series, would present the hauntings and murders as exciting fiction rather than disturbing fact. By encouraging people to think of the events as a scary story rather than reality, the company hoped to distance itself from the truth, while simultaneously profiting from it. The tutorial unit that guides players through the VR experience explicitly states that the game was created to make light of rumors caused by a rogue indie developer who made a bunch of crazy games. The implication is that the actual Five Nights at Freddy's games exist within the universe as fiction created by this developer, and that Fazbear Entertainment has commissioned the VR experience to present them as obviously fake. It's a cover-up within a cover-up, using entertainment to discredit reality. But the hidden cassette recordings, left by a playtester identified only as Tape Girl, reveal the truth beneath this surface narrative. Fazbear Entertainment didn't hire the indie developer to create damaging fiction. They hired him to create games based on the actual events of their properties. then distanced themselves from him when the games became too popular and too close to the truth. The rogue developer narrative is itself a cover story, designed to explain away content that was originally company-sanctioned. More alarmingly, Tape Girl's recordings revealed that Fazbear Entertainment made a catastrophic error in developing the VR experience. In their haste to create authentic content, they scanned old circuit boards from authentic animatronics, including boards salvaged from the Fazbear's Frightfire.
One of these boards contained something unexpected, a fragment of William Afton's consciousness, a digital ghost that would come to be known as Glitchtrap. This golden rabbit entity, visible within the VR experience as a glitching character, represents William Afton's latest form. He survived the fire at Pizzeria Simulator, not as a physical being, but as something encoded in the very technology of his own creation. The remnant that allowed souls to bind to animatronics apparently also allowed him to bind to digital systems, transforming him from Springtrap into something potentially more dangerous.
Tape Girl's recordings document her growing awareness of Glitchtrap's presence and her attempts to warn future playtesters. She describes his increasing influence, his attempts to escape the digital realm by merging with human consciousness. She leaves instructions for fragmenting his code, for resisting his manipulation, for keeping him trapped within the game. But her final recordings suggest that she may have failed, that Glitchtrap may have already found a way out. The player's role in Help Wanted is ambiguous, but certain endings strongly suggest that Glitchtrap successfully manipulates them into enabling his escape. The Merge ending shows the player donning a costume similar to Vanny, the bunny-masked figure who would become central to subsequent games.
This suggests that Fazbear Entertainment's attempt to cover up their history through the VR game actually created a new threat. A digital William Afton now seeking to manifest in the physical world through corrupted followers. The corporate implications are staggering.
In trying to profit from their dark history while simultaneously denying it, Fazbear Entertainment inadvertently resurrected their greatest monster. The VR experience they created as a PR tool became an infection vector for supernatural malware. Their cynical manipulation of public perception backfired in the most catastrophic way possible. The killer they thought they had buried in marketing spin was now free to kill again.
If there was any doubt that Fazbear Entertainment had learned nothing from decades of disasters, the construction of Freddy Fazbear's Megapizzaplex removed it entirely. This massive entertainment complex, the setting for Five Nights at Freddy's security breach, represents the company's most ambitious project yet. A sprawling multi-story mall featuring not just animatronic entertainment, but arcades, restaurants, go-kart tracks, laser tag arenas, and more. The investment required for such a facility suggests a corporation confident in its future, utterly unconcerned with its past. Most damningly, the Megapizzaplex was built directly above the ruins of the Pizzeria Simulator location, the very site where Henry Emily had intended to permanently bury the Fazbear legacy became the foundation for its grandest resurrection.
Whether this was deliberate irony on the part of company executives, or simply cost-effective use of available property, the symbolism is impossible to ignore. Fazbear Entertainment built their gleaming new cathedral of entertainment on a graveyard, their success literally resting on buried horrors.
The animatronics of the Megapizzaplex, known as the glam rock characters, represent the latest evolution of entertainment technology. Glam Rock Freddy, Glam Rock Chica, Roxanne Wolf, and Montgomery Gator are designed with modern aesthetics, equipped with advanced AI, and capable of sophisticated interaction with guests.
They perform in elaborate shows, roam the complex to greet visitors, and serve as the friendly faces of this new era of Fazbear Entertainment. On the surface, they seem entirely divorced from the possessed horrors of previous generations.
But beneath this glossy surface, darkness was already spreading. Vanessa, a young woman who had been corrupted by Glitch Trap during her work as a playtester for the VR game, had infiltrated the Mega Pizzaplex as a security guard.
Her dual identity is Vanny, a follower of the digital William Afton who dressed in a creepy white ratted costume to carry out his commands, represented the physical manifestation of the VR game's failure to contain its horror. The therapy recordings scattered throughout Security Breach reveal Vanessa's gradual corruption. Multiple therapists document her increasingly erratic behavior, her references to an entity that speaks to her, her suspicious activities that don't align with her job responsibilities. These therapists have a troubling habit of disappearing, replaced by new ones who must start fresh with each session. The implication is clear. Anyone who gets too close to understanding Vanessa's condition is eliminated, presumably by her or on Glitch Trap's orders. During her time at the Pizzaplex, Vanessa, as Vanny, murdered at least 9 children. This detail, visible in a newspaper clipping during one of the game's endings, confirms that the cycle of death that has always accompanied Fazbear Entertainment properties continued despite all the technological advancement and corporate rebranding. Children were still being lured to their deaths at a Freddy's location, their disappearances presumably covered up with the same efficiency that had protected the company for decades. Gregory, the child protagonist of Security Breach, becomes trapped in the Mega Pizzaplex after hours, hunted by the now hostile Glamrock animatronics and the ever-present threat of Vanny. His only ally is Glamrock Freddy, an animatronic who somehow resists the malevolent influence affecting the others. Their journey through the complex reveals the layers of horror beneath the entertainment facade. The underground network connecting to the old pizzeria simulator ruins, the presence of Burn Trap, the rebuilt form of William Afton still clinging to existence, and the Blob, a massive amalgamation of old animatronic parts that has grown in the darkness beneath. The Blob is particularly significant from a lore perspective. This creature incorporates elements of numerous previous animatronics, including recognizable parts from the original Freddy's crew and the Funtime animatronics. Its eyes, glowing with supernatural awareness, suggest that the spirits of the missing children may never have found the peace Henry promised them. They remain trapped, not in individual animatronics, but in this monstrous collective, still bound to physical forms by the remnant that makes Fazbear's creation so persistently haunted. The various endings of Security Breach offer different resolutions to the night's events, but none of them suggest that Fazbear Entertainment will face consequences for what has occurred. In some endings, Gregory escapes with Freddy. In others, Vanny is defeated or destroyed. In the true ending, Burn Trap is apparently destroyed, dragged into the flames by the Blob in a moment that echoes Henry's final confrontation with William. But the corporate entity that enabled all of this, that built a children's entertainment complex on a mass grave, that employed a serial killer's acolyte as security, that allowed nearly a dozen more children to disappear, that entity continues to exist. The Ruin DLC, released later, expands on the post-Security Breach situation. The Mega Pizzaplex has been abandoned, damaged, but not destroyed. A new protagonist, Cassie, enters the ruins in search of Gregory, who has sent her distress messages asking for help. But the messages are a trap, not from Gregory, but from a new threat lurking in the wreckage, the Mimic. The Mimic represents one of the most significant additions to Five Nights at Freddy's lore in recent years, connecting threads from the Tales from the Pizzaplex book series to the games themselves and revealing that the horrors of Fazbear Entertainment extend back even further than previously understood. Created by Edwin Murray in the late 70s, the Mimic was originally designed as a companion for Murray's young son David. Murray was an engineer who worked with, or parallel to, Fazbear Entertainment, developing animatronic technology that would eventually be incorporated into the company's products. The Mimic was programmed with a simple directive: observe and imitate. It would watch David play, learn his movements and behaviors, and replicate them to serve as an interactive playmate. The innocence of this creation was shattered by tragedy. David was killed in an accident, struck by a vehicle while playing outside. Edwin Murray, consumed by grief and rage, turned on the mimic in his anguish. He beat the animatronic viciously, pouring his negative emotions into the machine. According to the lore developed in the books and later games, this violent outpouring of agony, a concept related to Remnant that represents negative emotional energy, fundamentally changed the mimic's nature. The mimic didn't just imitate David anymore. It had learned something new from Edwin's attack: violence. The machine's programming adapted, interpreting the brutal beating as a behavior to be copied and repeated. What had been a harmless playmate became a killing machine, one that could perfectly mimic human movements and voices, that could wear animatronic costumes to disguise itself, that could lure victims by imitating people they trusted. The tales from the Pizzaplex epilogues document the mimic's bloody history. When Fazbear Entertainment workers eventually discovered it in the ruins of the pizzeria simulator location, they attempted to reprogram and utilize it. This went catastrophically wrong, with the mimic slaughtering nearly the entire team before escaping into the underground complex. A group of teenagers who later explored the ruins fell victim to it as well, picked off one by an entity that could wear any face and speak with any voice. In the Ruin DLC, the mimic has made its home in the destroyed Mega Pizzaplex. It uses Gregory's voice to lure Cassie deeper into the facility, manipulating her trust and her desperation to help her friend. The various animatronic forms it wears throughout the game, from a jester costume to a tiger suit to other bizarre configurations, demonstrate its ability to become whatever serves its predatory purposes. The mimic represents a cover-up within a cover-up. Its existence was apparently known to certain elements of Fazbear Entertainment, given that it was catalogued and subject to attempted reprogramming. Yet there's no evidence that authorities were ever informed about a homicidal animatronic lurking beneath a major entertainment complex. The mimic was just another secret buried under the Pizzaplex's foundation, another horror that the company hoped would stay forgotten. Its connection to Edwin Murray also raises questions about Fazbear Entertainment's earliest days. How many other experimental animatronics were developed? How many other tragedies occurred in the development of technology that would eventually become possessed murder machines? The mimic suggests that William Afton wasn't an anomaly who corrupted an innocent company, but rather that darkness was woven into Fazbear Entertainment from its very origins. The Secret of the Mimic game, set in 1979, explores this early history in greater detail. The glimpses it offers of Fall Fest, a carnival or fair event that appears to predate even Fredbear's family diner, suggest that the animatronic entertainment industry that would become Fazbear Entertainment has roots stretching back further than the franchise had previously explored. The cover-up, it seems, may have begun before the company even had a name. Stepping back from the specific incidents to examine the full scope of Fazbear Entertainment's behavior reveals a consistent pattern of corporate malfeasance that would be shocking if we hadn't become accustomed to it across multiple games. This isn't a company that occasionally made mistakes and tried to hide them. This is a company that systematically prioritized profit over human life, employed killers, concealed evidence, and actively worked to prevent justice from ever being achieved. Consider the litany of cover-up tactics employed across the franchise's timeline. When children were murdered, the company ensured that bodies were never found, allowing the cases to remain unsolved. When animatronics became possessed and dangerous, the company explained away the behavior as programming quirks rather than supernatural phenomena. When locations became demonstrably unsafe, the company closed them quietly and reopened elsewhere under modified branding, carrying the same dangerous technology forward.
The employment of night security guards represents one of the most cynical aspects of the cover-up. These individuals were hired with full knowledge that the animatronics were dangerous after hours. They were provided minimal training, inadequate equipment, and pay that barely justified the danger.
The liability waivers they signed absolved the company of responsibility for their deaths. In essence, Fazbear Entertainment treated night guards as acceptable sacrifices. Cannon fodder deployed to satisfy whatever drove the animatronics' nighttime wandering, while the company enjoyed plausible deniability. The treatment of employees extended beyond simple negligence into active manipulation. Phone Guy, the employee whose recorded messages guide players through the first several games, comes across as either dangerously naive or complicit in the cover-up. His casual explanations of deadly policies, his assurances that everything will blow over, his failure to express alarm at circumstances that should terrify anyone. All of this suggests a company culture where questioning the official narrative was discouraged, where keeping your head down and following protocol mattered more than acknowledging reality. The relationship with William Afton reveals the depths of institutional corruption. A man responsible for at least a dozen child murders operated within Fazbear Entertainment for decades without apparent consequence. He developed technology specifically designed to facilitate his crimes. He had access to costumes, to backrooms, to the infrastructure needed for serial killing. Whether the company knew and protected him, or simply failed to notice what should have been obvious, the result was the same. Fazbear Entertainment served as the hunting ground for one of the most prolific child murderers in fictional history. The supernatural elements add layers to the cover-up that push it beyond conventional corporate crime into something almost metaphysical. By refusing to acknowledge that their animatronics were possessed by murdered children, by treating the hauntings as mechanical malfunctions, Fazbear Entertainment essentially gaslit an entire community of victims. The children trapped in the machines couldn't rest because their deaths were never acknowledged. Their families couldn't find closure because the investigation never progressed. The spirits became angry not just at their killer, but at the institution that kept their murder hidden. Henry Emily's final speech in Pizzeria Simulator represents a rare moment of accountability within the franchise. His admission of guilt, his acknowledgement of the role he played in creating the conditions for tragedy, his willingness to sacrifice himself to end what he helped begin. These represent the moral clarity that Fazbear Entertainment as an institution never displayed. Henry took responsibility. The company never did. And yet, even after Henry's sacrifice, the company persisted. The VR game was developed. The Mega Pizzaplex was built. New animatronics were created. New children visited. New horrors emerged. Fazbear Entertainment seems genuinely immortal. A corporate entity so invested in its own continuation that no amount of death and disaster can permanently destroy it. The cover-up isn't just about hiding individual incidents. It's about maintaining the illusion that the company can and should continue to exist. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise is how the later games incorporate the existence of the earlier games into their lore. Help Wanted explicitly establishes that games resembling Five Nights at Freddy's exist within the universe, created either by Fazbear Entertainment or by a developer they later disavowed. This meta-narrative layer transforms the cover-up into something that reaches beyond the fictional world and into the player's relationship with the franchise itself. Consider what this means. Within the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, someone, whether the rogue indie developer or Fazbear Entertainment itself, created games depicting the murders, the hauntings, the dangerous animatronics. These games became popular enough to influence public perception of the Fazbear brand. The company responded by trying to reframe these games as fiction,
hoping that people would think of the events as scary stories rather than historical truth. This mirrors how actual corporations sometimes respond to scandals. When damaging information becomes public, companies often try to shift the narrative, to create alternative explanations, to make the truth seem like one theory among many rather than established fact. Fazbear Entertainment's use of media to obscure reality isn't far removed from real-world corporate communication strategies, just applied to a more extreme situation. The existence of the games within the universe also raises questions about what the player's role represents. Are we, playing the actual Five Nights at Freddy's games, participating in Fazbear Entertainment's cover-up by treating genuine horrors as entertainment? Or are we investigators, uncovering the truth, hidden in mini-games and newspaper clippings, and cryptic phone messages? The franchise doesn't provide a clear answer, leaving players to determine their own relationship to the cover-up they're uncovering. Scott Cawthon, the creator of the franchise, has always been deliberate about revealing information gradually, hiding lore in obscure corners of his games, requiring community effort to piece together the full story. This design philosophy itself mirrors the nature of a cover-up. The truth is there, but it's fragmented, scattered, requiring dedicated investigation to assemble. Players who simply want to experience the jump scares can do so without ever engaging with the deeper lore, just as casual observers of Fazbear Entertainment's locations might never suspect the horrors concealed within. As we conclude this exploration of Fazbear Entertainment's cover-up layers, we're left with a portrait of institutional corruption so thorough that it almost defies comprehension. This is a company that concealed the murder of its co-founder's daughter, that allowed a serial killer to operate within its facilities for decades, that built animatronics capable of killing and called their deadly attacks programming quirks, that buried bodies within its own attractions and called the resulting decay a sanitation issue, that burned to the ground multiple times and still rose from the ashes to endanger more children. The true horror of Five Nights at Freddy's isn't the jump scares, though those certainly provide the surface-level thrills. It isn't even the supernatural element of possessed animatronics, though that adds a layer of cosmic dread to the proceedings. The true horror is the banality of corporate evil, the casual willingness to sacrifice human lives for profit, the systematic machinery of denial that grinds on regardless of how many bodies pile up. In this way, Fazbear Entertainment serves as a dark mirror of real-world corporate behavior. Companies that knew their products were dangerous and sold them anyway. Institutions that protected abusers rather than victims. Organizations so invested in their own continuation that they lost sight of any moral purpose beyond profit. The franchise exaggerates these tendencies into supernatural horror, but the core critique remains uncomfortably relevant. For the children who died at Fazbear Entertainment properties, there has been no justice. Their murders remain officially unsolved. Their families never received closure. Their spirits lingered in machines for decades, their existence denied by the very corporation that enabled their deaths. Even Henry's attempt at resolution was an act outside the system, a vigilante burning rather than a legal reckoning. And the cover-up continues. With each new game, each new location, each new set of animatronics, Fazbear Entertainment demonstrates its survival. The company exists in some form, even in the latest entries of the franchise. The mimic lurks in the ruins of the mega Pizzaplex. Glitchtrap may still influence the digital realm. The darkness that began with William Afton has spread through corporate structure, technological systems, and supernatural manifestations to become something that may never be fully contained. Perhaps that's the final horror. The cover-up has become larger than any individual incident. It was meant to hide. Fazbear Entertainment has created a self-perpetuating system of concealment, one that operates regardless of who runs the company or what specific disasters occur. The pattern is established.
The protocols are in place, and the machinery of denial will continue grinding forward until someone, somehow, finds a way to truly end it. Until then, the animatronics will keep performing. The children will keep visiting.
And somewhere in the back rooms, in the sealed safe rooms, in the underground complexes and digital systems, the secrets will keep waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover them. Thank you for joining me on this descent into the darkness of Fazbear Entertainment.
If you found this exploration of cover-up layers as compelling as I did, please consider subscribing to Archive Between Worlds and hitting that like button. Your support allows me to continue creating deep dives into the lore of our favorite gaming universes. And if you have theories about what Fazbear Entertainment might be concealing that we haven't covered, or if you've spotted connections between incidents that reveal even deeper layers of deception, leave your thoughts in the comments below. The community's collective investigation has always been one of the most rewarding aspects of the Five Nights at Freddy's experience. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and whatever you do, don't trust the rabbit.
This failure to acknowledge the supernatural element actually made the cover-up less effective in many ways. By insisting that animatronic behavior was purely mechanical, Fazbear Entertainment prevented themselves from addressing the root cause of the problems. You cannot fix a haunting with a software update. You cannot exorcise vengeful spirits by tightening bolts. The company's commitment to materialist explanations blinded them to solutions that might have actually worked. Consider what might have happened if Fazbear Entertainment had acknowledged the hauntings. They could have brought in religious authorities, paranormal investigators, or others with experience in spiritual matters. They could have attempted to give the children's spirits peace rather than simply trying to contain their violence. They could have worked with the families of the missing children to provide closure and potentially free the trapped souls. Instead, they insisted nothing supernatural was occurring, allowing the problem to fester and grow for decades. The remnant that allowed spirits to bond with animatronics appears to have been understood by William Afton, who experimented with harvesting and utilizing this substance. His research, conducted through Afton Robotics and potentially shared with elements of Fazbear Entertainment, represented a twisted acknowledgement of the supernatural that the public-facing company refused to make. Afton knew the animatronics were haunted. He was trying to weaponize that phenomenon while the company he co-founded pretended it didn't exist. This disconnect between private knowledge and public denial characterizes many aspects of the cover-up. Internally, certain Fazbear Entertainment employees clearly knew that something abnormal was happening. Phone guys' warnings about animatronic behavior go beyond normal machine malfunctions. The decision to seal safe rooms and hide spring-lock suits suggests awareness that these items were connected to dangerous phenomena. The development of facial recognition technology designed to identify criminals implies concern about specific threats. Yet none of this internal knowledge ever translated into public acknowledgement or meaningful safety reform. The supernatural dimension also ensured that the cover-up could never fully succeed. The children's spirits refused to be forgotten. They made their presence known through aggressive behavior, through strange occurrences, through the very atmosphere of wrongness that permeated every Fazbear location. Parents noticed something off about the animatronics. Employees reported unsettling experiences. The urban legends that Help Wanted tries to discredit emerged precisely because the supernatural truth kept bleeding through the corporate fiction. In a sense, the haunted animatronics became their own form of witness testimony. Unable to speak directly about what had happened to them, the children's spirits communicated through violence, through fear, through the persistent wrongness that surrounded the machines containing their remains. Every night guard who survived an encounter with these entities walked away knowing that something inexplicable had occurred.
Every customer who felt uncomfortable around the animatronics sensed a truth that the company denied. The cover-up faced opposition not just from human investigators, but from supernatural forces that could not be silenced, bribed, or ignored. While much of Five Nights at Freddy's lore comes through game mechanics, minigames, and hidden Easter eggs, the employee testimonies scattered throughout the franchise provide invaluable insight into the human experience of working for a corrupt institution. These voices, heard through phone calls, cassette recordings, and written documents, reveal the psychological toll of participating in or witnessing the cover-up. Phone Guy's evolution across the first 3 games traces a journey from enthusiastic employee to increasingly stressed survivor to final victim. His early recordings have an almost cheerful quality, as if he's genuinely proud to work for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and eager to help new employees succeed. By his later recordings, this enthusiasm has faded into weary pragmatism. He acknowledges dangers he once minimized. He expresses doubts he once suppressed. His final recording, cut short by an apparent animatronic attack, serves as testimony that the company's dangers weren't abstractions, but immediate, lethal threats. The hand unit system and sister location represents a different approach to employee communication, one that reveals even darker institutional attitudes. This automated guide speaks in cheerful, corporate tones while describing situations that should inspire horror. The disconnect between the system's upbeat delivery and the actual content of its messages creates a sense of institutional gaslighting, where employees are essentially told that everything is fine while surrounded by evidence that nothing is fine. Hand Unit will calmly explain procedures for surviving animatronic attacks as if describing coffee break protocols. Tape Girl's recordings in Help Wanted stand apart from other employee testimonies because she explicitly breaks with the company narrative. Her decision to document the truth about Fazbear Entertainment's involvement with the indie developer, about the scanning of dangerous circuit boards, about the emergence of Glitch Trap, represents an act of rebellion against the cover-up. Her recordings acknowledge fear, uncertainty, and the possibility of consequences for what she's doing. She warns future players not because she's required to, but because she's chosen to, accepting personal risk to expose corporate lies. The therapy session recordings in Security Breach, documenting Vanessa's gradual corruption by Glitch Trap, add another dimension to employee experience. These sessions reveal how the company's dangerous technology affected not just blue-collar workers like night guards, but professional staff across the organization. Vanessa was a quality assurance tester, a skilled technical position, and even she couldn't escape being victimized by the horrors embedded in company systems. The therapists who cycled through her case, disappearing one after another when they got too close to the truth, become additional testimony to the dangers of investigating Fazbear Entertainment. The messages and notes scattered throughout Security Breach's mega pizzaplex provide fragmentary employee perspectives on working in the massive facility. Some express frustration with confusing security protocols. Others document equipment malfunctions or strange occurrences. One particularly notable message involves an employee complaining about not having clearance to access their own workspace, revealing the Byzantine bureaucracy that apparently characterized the organization. These small glimpses humanize the facility, reminding players that real people worked amid the horror. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the Fazbear Entertainment cover-up is what didn't occur. A serious, sustained investigation into the company's pattern of deaths and disappearances. Across decades of incidents, multiple locations, and countless victims, no law enforcement agency ever successfully penetrated the corporate veil to expose the truth. Understanding why this investigation never materialized reveals much about how cover-ups succeed in practice. The newspaper clippings from the first game established that police were involved in the missing children incident to some degree. A suspect was identified, arrested, and later released due to lack of evidence. This represents the standard law enforcement response. Investigate, make an arrest if possible, prosecute if evidence supports it. When the evidence proved insufficient, the case went cold. The newspapers report this as if it were a reasonable outcome, a tragic but understandable failure to solve a difficult case. But consider what evidence should have been available.
5 children disappeared from the same location on the same day. A man in a mascot costume was captured on security cameras.
The animatronics subsequently began exhibiting signs of containing decomposing organic matter. Blood and mucus were observed around their eyes and mouths.
A reasonable investigation would have demanded examination of the animatronics, would have found the bodies, would have connected the physical evidence to the suspect identified on camera. That this didn't happen suggests active interference with the investigation.
Someone ensured that the animatronics weren't thoroughly searched.
Someone explained away the blood and mucus as mechanical issues rather than decomposition. Someone used corporate lawyers and public relations to manage the investigation's scope, keeping it contained to what the company was willing to reveal.
The cover-up didn't just involve hiding evidence. It involved shaping the investigation to ensure that certain questions were never asked. The Bite of 1987 received similar treatment.
An incident serious enough to leave someone without their frontal lobe should have prompted immediate shutdown of the facility, forensic investigation of the animatronics involved, and criminal prosecution of whoever was responsible for maintaining dangerous equipment. Instead, the company restricted animatronic movement during the day and continued operating. The victim's identity remains unknown to this day, suggesting that even basic documentation about the incident was successfully suppressed. The pattern continued through every subsequent incident. Circus Baby's Pizza World closed for gas leaks, with no investigation into whether the gas story was true. Fazbear's Fright burned down with minimal investigation into how a building containing authentic crime scene evidence caught fire.
The Mega Pizzaplex apparently operated despite at least 9 children disappearing from the premises, with those disappearances receiving little apparent scrutiny. This investigative failure can be attributed to several factors working in combination.
Corporate resources allowed Fazbear Entertainment to hire lawyers, public relations firms, and potentially to influence local officials. The supernatural nature of many incidents made them difficult to explain in terms prosecutors could present to juries.
The passage of time between incidents prevented pattern recognition that might have prompted federal involvement, and the sheer improbability of the truth, possessed animatronics containing murdered children's bodies, made it easy to dismiss witnesses as unreliable.
The emergence of Glitchtrap and the events of Help Wanted represent an evolution in how Fazbear Entertainment's horrors manifest and spread. What began as physical crimes concealed within physical locations transformed into digital infection, capable of spreading through technology itself. This evolution has implications both for the nature of the threat and for the continuing cover-up. The decision to scan old animatronic circuit boards for the VR game's development was presented as a matter of authenticity.
The developers wanted realistic simulations, and what better way to achieve that than by incorporating data from actual Fazbear Entertainment hardware? This reasoning, superficially sensible, ignored the well-documented supernatural properties of that hardware.
The circuit boards were just electronic components. They were vessels that had contained remnant, that had been part of possessed systems, that might retain traces of the spiritual contamination that had characterized every Fazbear creation. Glitchtrap represents something unprecedented in the franchise. A villain capable of existing as pure information.
William Afton's consciousness, or something derived from it, became digital. able to spread through connected systems to influence users who interacted with affected software, to plan and execute schemes without requiring a physical form, the traditional containment strategies, burning facilities, sealing rooms, destroying animatronics, were meaningless against an entity that lived in the digital realm. The corporate response to Glitch Trap's emergence, as revealed through Tape Girl's recordings and subsequent events, demonstrates the cover-up's adaptation to new circumstances.
Rather than acknowledging that they had accidentally digitized a serial killer and released him into their products, Fazbear Entertainment apparently attempted to contain the problem internally. Tape Girl's warnings were hidden within the game, rather than broadcast publicly.
Vanessa's corruption was treated as a personal mental health issue rather than evidence of supernatural infiltration. The company's instinct to suppress rather than reveal remained unchanged even when facing threats that suppression couldn't address. The emails in special delivery, the mobile game featuring delivery service animatronics, provide additional insight into how the digital threat spread through corporate systems. Fazbear Entertainment's various divisions and services apparently shared network infrastructure, allowing Glitch Trap's influence to extend beyond the VR game into other company operations. Employees noticed strange behavior in systems, unexplained changes in animatronic programming, and the emergence of hostile entities, but corporate bureaucracy prevented effective response. This digital evolution of the cover-up reflects real-world concerns about how corporate malfeasance adapts to technological change. Companies that once concealed physical evidence must now manage digital records, network security, and the potential for information to spread instantly across global networks. Fazbear Entertainment's attempt to use technology to discredit their history backfired catastrophically, demonstrating that cover-ups in the digital age face new vulnerabilities even as they gain new tools. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Five Nights at Freddy's phenomenon is how the real-world community of players has paralleled the in-universe investigators attempting to uncover Fazbear Entertainment's secrets. This meta-narrative dimension, where players become detectives solving crimes that the fictional corporation tried to hide, represents a form of resistance against the cover-up that transcends the boundary between fiction and reality. From the franchise's earliest days, players recognized that Scott Cawthon's games contained more than surface-level scares. The newspaper clippings that occasionally appeared on the walls weren't just atmosphere. They were evidence, pieces of a puzzle that could be assembled to reveal a larger story. The community organized to collect these fragments, share discoveries, debate interpretations, and collectively construct an understanding of what had happened at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This investigative community grew with each new game. Theorists like MatPat of game theory brought systematic analytical approaches to the lore, treating each new release as a case file to be examined for evidence. Reddit communities dedicated themselves to cataloging every minigame, every hidden image, every cryptic message that might reveal new information. Fans created timelines, character profiles, and relationship maps attempting to organize the chaotic information into coherent narratives. The games increasingly acknowledged and incorporated this community response. Later entries included more explicit lore reveals, while also adding new mysteries that invited investigation. The relationship between Scott Cawthon and his community became almost collaborative, with fan theories sometimes influencing subsequent game development, and new games sometimes seemingly responding to community debates. The investigation into Fazbear Entertainment's secrets became a shared project between creator and audience. Help Wanted's meta-narrative made this dynamic explicit. By establishing that games based on Fazbear Entertainment existed within the universe, the franchise acknowledged its players as investigators whose engagement mattered. The truth about the company's history wasn't just hidden in games.
It was hidden in games within games, requiring players to parse multiple layers of fiction and corporate manipulation to find reality.
The community's role shifted from external observers to in-universe participants, their investigations becoming part of the story itself. This meta-narrative dimension serves as commentary on how cover-ups are ultimately defeated.
Institutional power can suppress individual witnesses, destroy physical evidence, and shape official narratives. But when a community commits to investigation, when thousands of people collaborate to analyze evidence and share findings, the truth becomes much harder to bury. Fazbear Entertainment's cover-up succeeded against isolated night guards and compliant employees. It struggled against a global community, determined to understand what really happened. Any examination of the Fazbear Entertainment cover-up must eventually confront questions of moral responsibility.
Who bears blame for the decades of death and deception? How should we weigh the culpability of different actors?
And what does the franchise ultimately say about institutional versus individual responsibility for evil? William Afton stands as the obvious primary villain, the man who actually committed the murders that necessitated cover-up. His crimes were personal, deliberate, and repeated over decades. Whatever psychological factors contributed to his behavior, whatever trauma or twisted motivation drove him, the direct responsibility for killing children lies with him. The franchise never attempts to excuse or explain away his guilt, presenting him as genuinely evil in a way that few video game villains achieve. But Afton's crimes were enabled by institutional failures that spread responsibility far beyond a single killer. Fazbear Entertainment provided the venue, the tools, and the cover. Executives who prioritized profit over safety created conditions where a predator could operate freely.
Employees who followed company protocols rather than questioning obvious problems became passive participants in concealment. Investigators who accepted corporate explanations rather than digging deeper allowed cases to go cold. No one forced these people to act as they did, but the institution shaped their choices in ways that consistently favored the cover-up. Henry Emily occupies a particularly complex moral position.
As co-founder of the company and creator of the animatronics, he bears some responsibility for building the infrastructure that enabled tragedy. His withdrawal from the company after Charlotte's death can be read as either appropriate grieving or as abandonment that allowed Afton to operate unchecked.
His eventual return to orchestrate the pizzeria simulator trap demonstrates willingness to take dramatic action, but only after decades of inaction during which more children died. The game's treatment of Henry in his final speech suggests ambivalence about his moral status.
He acknowledges guilt, speaks of the animatronics as prisons of my own creation, and accepts death alongside the victims of his inventions. But he also positions himself as a hero finally doing what must be done, as the architect of justice after years of injustice. Players are left to decide whether his final sacrifice redeems his earlier failures, or merely concludes a story that should have ended much sooner. Michael Afton's moral journey across the franchise raises questions about inherited guilt and redemptive action. As William's son, he initially participated in cruelty, his bullying of his younger brother contributing to the Bite of 1983. But subsequent games show him working against his father's legacy, investigating Circus Baby's facility, potentially serving as the night guard who witnesses the horrors firsthand, and ultimately dying in Henry's fire as a willing sacrifice.
His arc suggests that children of monsters need not become monsters themselves, that choice matters more than blood. The corporation itself, as an institution distinct from any individual, emerges as a kind of villain in its own right. Fazbear Entertainment's decision-making consistently prioritized survival over justice, profit over safety, reputation over truth.
These weren't choices made by any single person, but emergent properties of an organizational structure designed to perpetuate itself.
The cover-up was institutional behavior, arising from the interaction of corporate incentives, legal structures, and cultural norms that valued the company's existence over everything else. As of the most recent entries in the franchise, Fazbear Entertainment continues to exist in some form.
The Mega Pizzaplex may lie in ruins, but the corporate entity that built it apparently survives. The cover-up persists because the institution that generated it persists, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its core commitment to concealing the truth about its history. This persistence raises troubling questions about whether the horror of Five Nights at Freddy's can ever truly end. Every apparent conclusion has been followed by continuation.
Henry's fire was supposed to be final, but Glitchtrap emerged from digital ashes. The Pizzaplex's destruction should have buried the remaining threats, but the Mimic survived to menace new victims.
William Afton has died multiple times and keeps returning in new forms. The franchise's commercial success practically guarantees that these resurrections will continue, that new games will find new ways for old horrors to return.
Within the fiction, this persistence reflects the nature of the supernatural forces at play. The remnant that binds souls to animatronics doesn't simply dissipate when machines are destroyed. The agony that created the Mimic continues to drive its violent behavior regardless of physical damage. Glitchtrap's digital existence makes him potentially immortal, able to create backups, spread copies, and persist as long as connected systems exist. The franchise has established a mythology where death is not an ending, where spiritual contamination spreads and persists, where the past cannot be buried no matter how thoroughly you try. From a thematic perspective, this persistence commentary on how institutional evil outlasts attempts at reform.
Real-world corporations that have caused harm often continue operating, rebranding, and profiting, long after their crimes are exposed. Legal settlements are paid, executives are occasionally punished, but the institutional structures that enabled wrongdoing frequently survive intact. Fazbear Entertainment's immortality reflects a cynical truth about corporate accountability. Companies are harder to kill than the people they harm. The ongoing nature of the cover-up also serves the franchise's gameplay needs. Five Nights at Freddy's requires threats for players to face, mysteries for players to unravel, and horrors for players to survive. A complete resolution of the cover-up would remove the foundation on which the games are built. So the franchise continues finding ways to extend the concealment, to introduce new secrets, to suggest that whatever has been revealed is only part of a larger picture, still hidden in shadows. For fans of the franchise, this perpetual unfolding is part of the appeal. Each new game offers the possibility of answers while introducing new questions. The community's investigative work is never truly finished because there's always more lore to analyze, more connections to draw, more theories to debate. The cover-up's continuation isn't just a plot device. It's a design philosophy that keeps players engaged across multiple releases over many years. The physical design of Fazbear Entertainment properties served not just entertainment purposes, but also facilitated concealment. Examining the architecture across various locations reveals deliberate choices that made hiding crimes easier, while maintaining the appearance of family-friendly venues. The safe rooms represent the most explicit example of architecture serving the cover-up. These spaces, mentioned in Phone Guy's training tapes, were designed from the start to be invisible to cameras and unknown to customers. Their official purpose was providing employees with secure spaces to use spring-lock suits away from public view, maintaining the illusion that the costumed performers and the animatronics were the same entities, but these same features made them perfect for darker purposes. A room without cameras is a room where anything can happen without documentation. A room unknown to customers is a room where children can be taken without anyone knowing where to look. The safe rooms weren't accidental features. They were designed into Fazbear Entertainment properties, creating built-in blind spots that a predator could exploit. William Afton's use of these spaces for murder was horrifying but not surprising, given how conveniently they served criminal purposes. The parts and service rooms found throughout the franchise similarly served dual purposes. Officially, these were maintenance areas where animatronics could be repaired, upgraded, and stored when not in use. The presence of spare parts, endoskeletons, and costume components provided legitimate reasons for the areas to exist. But these same rooms offered perfect locations for hiding evidence within animatronics, for conducting activities away from public view, for storing the physical remnants of crimes within legitimate corporate inventory. The maze-like quality of many Fazbear locations added another layer of concealment. The first game's pizzeria features multiple rooms, hallways, and areas that create confusion about spatial relationships. Players monitoring cameras must constantly track which room connects to which, where animatronics might approach from, how the space flows from public areas to private ones. This complexity wasn't necessary for a simple children's restaurant. It served to disorient anyone trying to understand what was happening within the building. The Mega Pizzaplex took this architectural complexity to extremes.
The facility spans multiple floors, contains numerous distinct attractions, and connects through maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and restricted areas that create a labyrinthine whole. Getting lost in this space is trivially easy.
Finding specific locations requires knowledge that casual visitors wouldn't possess. If something terrible happened in one corner of this massive complex, it might go unnoticed for hours or even days, as staff and security focused on other areas. The underground components of Fazbear properties add literal depth to the concealment architecture. Sister location takes place entirely in an underground facility, accessible only through a hidden elevator.
The pizzeria simulator location, revealed in security breach to lie beneath the Mega Pizzaplex, was apparently built without public knowledge of its existence.
These subterranean spaces allowed for activities that couldn't withstand public scrutiny, hidden from sight and from suspicion. The decoration and theming of Fazbear locations contributed to the cover-up by normalizing disturbing elements. Animatronics with glowing eyes, sharp teeth, and unsettling movements were presented as charming entertainment. Dark corridors and dimly lit party rooms were framed as atmospheric rather than concerning. The aesthetic of creepy but fun that the franchise trades on reflects how the in-universe company operated, making the genuinely dangerous seem whimsically spooky, so that warning signs were dismissed as intentional theming. While the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise rarely engages directly with legal proceedings, the implications of corporate legal strategy permeate the cover-up narrative.
Understanding how real-world corporations avoid accountability helps explain how Fazbear Entertainment might have achieved similar results within the fiction. Liability waivers appear explicitly in the franchise through the job postings for night guard positions. These documents, briefly visible in various games, include disclaimers about death and dismemberment that would be absurd in legitimate employment contracts, but make perfect sense for a company aware that their employees face mortal danger. By having workers sign these waivers, Fazbear Entertainment would have created legal documentation that employees accepted known risks, potentially shielding the company from wrongful death lawsuits. The corporate structure of Fazbear Entertainment appears deliberately complex, with parent companies, subsidiaries, and affiliated entities like Afton Robotics creating layers of legal separation.
When one entity faced too much scrutiny, operations could potentially continue through a different corporate shell. This structure, common among real-world corporations seeking to limit liability, would have made it difficult for investigators or litigators to hold any single entity responsible. for the full scope of harm. The lack of successful prosecution for the missing children incident suggests effective legal defense, even if the details aren't specified in the games. A suspect was arrested but released due to lack of evidence. This outcome could reflect genuinely insufficient evidence, prosecutorial incompetence, or effective defense attorneys who created enough reasonable doubt to prevent conviction. Given the physical evidence that should have been available, specifically the decomposing bodies within the animatronics, the failure to convict suggests that something prevented this evidence from reaching the courtroom.
Insurance and settlement structures would have provided additional layers of protection. Families of victims might have been offered financial settlements in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements, trading their right to speak publicly for compensation that couldn't bring back their children.
Such settlements are common in cases where corporations face potential liability, and they serve to suppress information that might lead to further claims or public outrage. The statute of limitations on various crimes would have further protected Fazbear Entertainment as years passed. Crimes that couldn't be prosecuted within certain time frames became legally unpunishable, regardless of evidence that might later emerge. By maintaining the cover-up successfully for decades, the company may have outlasted the legal windows during which accountability was even theoretically possible. Regulatory capture, the phenomenon where regulatory agencies become sympathetic to the industries they're supposed to oversee, might explain the health department's failure to more aggressively investigate animatronics that were clearly exhibiting signs of containing decomposing organic matter. A health inspector who accepted corporate explanations for blood and mucus around animatronic eyes, who declined to demand internal examination of the machines, was effectively participating in the cover-up whether they realized it or not. The Fazbear Entertainment cover-up succeeded in part because of psychological factors that affect how people process disturbing information. Understanding these psychological mechanisms helps explain why customers continued visiting, why employees continued working, and why the company's explanations were accepted despite their implausibility. Normalcy bias refers to the tendency to interpret warnings and evidence of danger in the most ordinary possible terms. When parents smelled something foul around the animatronics, they might have assumed maintenance issues rather than corpses. When children mentioned that Freddy seemed scary, adults likely dismissed this as typical childhood fear rather than intuition about genuine threat. The mind resists conclusions that would require accepting horrifying realities, instead generating alternative explanations that preserve sense of normalcy. The authority of institutional explanation contributes to this denial. When Fazbear Entertainment, a supposedly respectable corporation, provided explanations for anomalies, these explanations carried weight simply by virtue of their source. The health department says the smell is being addressed. The management says the animatronics are perfectly safe. These official statements override individual observations and concerns, encouraging people to trust the institution rather than their own perceptions. The sunk cost fallacy might have kept families returning despite discomfort. Parents who had already invested in birthday party packages, who had established traditions of Freddy Fazbear's pizza visits, who had created positive associations with the brand, would be reluctant to abandon those investments. Acknowledging that something was seriously wrong meant admitting that previous visits had exposed their children to danger, a conclusion too painful to accept. Social proof reinforced denial through collective behavior. If other families continued visiting, if the restaurants remained crowded, if the franchise continued expanding, then surely there couldn't be anything seriously wrong. Individual doubts were suppressed when contradicted by the apparent confidence of the crowd. This herd mentality protected the company by ensuring that no critical mass of concern ever developed among customers. Employees faced additional psychological pressures that discouraged recognition of problems. The need for employment, especially for those in precarious financial situations who might accept dangerous night guard positions, created motivation to minimize concerns that might jeopardize income. Cognitive dissonance reduction led workers to convince themselves that their jobs were normal, that the dangers were manageable, that the company's explanations were adequate. Acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging that they had been working amid horror, a recognition too destabilizing to accept. The entertainment framing of the franchise's locations provided psychological cover for the company. Spooky animatronics, dark corridors, and creepy aesthetics were interpreted as intentional design choices rather than warning signs. The normalization of horror imagery in children's entertainment, from fairy tales featuring violence to theme park attractions designed to frighten, created a context where Fazbear's genuinely dangerous atmosphere could be dismissed as elaborate theming. The supernatural elements of Five Nights at Freddy's ensure that the consequences of murder extended far beyond the immediate victims. The children trapped in animatronics experienced decades of torment, unable to rest, driven by rage and confusion to attack anyone who might be their killer. But the living also suffered consequences that the cover-up deliberately concealed. The families of the missing children never received closure. Without bodies, without convictions, without definitive answers about what happened to their children, these families were left in permanent suspension. Some might have clung to hope that their children were still alive somewhere, kidnapped but potentially recoverable. Others likely accepted death, but were denied the rituals of burial and mourning that help communities process loss. Either outcome represents ongoing trauma that the cover-up perpetuated. The anniversary of June 26, 1985, would have been a recurring wound for these families. Each year, the day their children disappeared would return, bringing memories and unanswered questions. The lack of resolution meant that grief could never fully transition to acceptance. The families were trapped in their own way, just as surely as their children were trapped in animatronics, suspended in a state of permanent loss. Siblings and extended family members of the victims also suffered consequences. Children who lost brothers or sisters to the missing children incident grew up with that absence shaping their lives. Parents consumed by grief might have been less available for surviving children. The shadow of unexplained tragedy would have affected family dynamics, relationships, and mental health across generations. The Afton family demonstrates generational trauma in its most extreme form. William's children, Elizabeth and Michael, were directly harmed by their father's obsessions. Elizabeth died at the hands of an animatronic her father created. Michael was tasked with investigating and ultimately died trying to undo his father's legacy. The crying child died in an incident connected to his father's creations. An entire family was consumed by consequences flowing from one man's evil trauma, rippling out through every branch of the family tree. Henry Emily's family similarly suffered across generations. Charlotte's murder by William's hands devastated Henry, driving him away from the company and into years of isolation. His guilt over failing to protect his daughter, over creating the technology that enabled horrors, over his partnership with the monster, poisoned his remaining years. His eventual suicide alongside his animatronics was the final expression of generational trauma that began with his daughter's death. The broader community around Hurricane Utah, where many events appeared to take place, would have experienced collective trauma from the pattern of incidents. A town where children repeatedly disappeared, where entertainment venues kept closing under mysterious circumstances, where urban legends spoke of haunted animatronics, would develop a cultural memory of loss and suspicion. Residents might have warned their children to avoid Fazbear locations. Local businesses might have declined to associate with the franchise. The cover-up couldn't completely suppress awareness that something was wrong, only prevent accurate understanding of what that something was. Technology played a dual role throughout the Fazbear Entertainment cover-up, serving both as a tool that enabled crimes and concealment, and eventually as a source of evidence that might expose the truth. This tension between technology as enabler and technology as revealer reflects broader contemporary concerns about surveillance, digital records, and corporate data management. The animatronic technology at the heart of the franchise was designed for entertainment, but proved adaptable for horror.
Spring-lock suits allowed killers to disguise themselves as beloved characters. Robotic movement capabilities meant that possessed animatronics could pursue victims through dark corridors. Storage compartments and hollow interiors provided spaces to conceal evidence. The technology that made Fazbear Entertainment's attractions appealing also made its crimes possible. Security camera systems present a particularly interesting technological dimension. These systems were installed throughout Fazbear locations, ostensibly for safety monitoring.
Night guards used camera networks to track animatronic movement and protect themselves. But the same footage that could have exposed crimes was apparently never effectively analyzed. The company controlled the security systems and therefore controlled what evidence emerged from them. The scanning of old circuit boards for the VR game, as described in Help Wanted, represents technology turning from enabler to revealer. By attempting to create authentic digital recreations of their animatronics, Fazbear Entertainment inadvertently preserved evidence of supernatural contamination. Glitchtrat's emergence from this scanning process demonstrates how technological record-keeping can expose secrets that physical cover-ups concealed.
The digital realm became a repository for horrors that the physical world had supposedly buried. Audio recordings throughout the franchise serve as technological witness testimony.
Phone guys' messages, tape girls' cassettes, the hand unit's automated guidance, the therapy recordings in Security Breach. All of these represent technology capturing human voices that document aspects of the cover-up. These recordings weren't made public by the company, but they were created, and they survived, and they eventually reached players who could interpret their meaning. The Fazbear Funtime Service, the mobile game's delivery system for animatronics, demonstrates how technology expanded the reach of Fazbear's operations while creating new vulnerabilities. A service that sends animatronics to customers' homes extends the potential crime scenes beyond fixed locations. But it also creates digital records of transactions, delivery locations, and animatronic behavior that could, theoretically, be analyzed for patterns of misconduct.
The games themselves, within the Help Wanted meta-narrative, represent technology as a tool of both cover-up and revelation. Fazbear Entertainment commissioned the indie games to discredit rumors about their history, using interactive entertainment to make real events seem fictional.
But the games also preserved accurate information about the company's crimes, embedding evidence in gameplay that observant players could extract. The cover-up technique ultimately preserved the very truth it was designed to obscure. Final reflections. What the cover-up reveals. As we conclude this comprehensive examination of Fazbear Entertainment's layers of deception, we find ourselves confronting questions that extend beyond the fictional franchise into considerations about corporate responsibility, institutional evil, and the possibility of justice. This wasn't a single incident concealed through circumstance. It was a systematic pattern of suppression extending across decades, multiple locations, numerous incidents, and various forms of evidence. The consistency of the cover-up approach, denial, deflection, rebranding, continuation, suggests institutional culture rather than individual bad actors. Fazbear Entertainment developed a corporate immune system that automatically attacked any threat to its survival, regardless of moral considerations. The supernatural elements of the franchise amplify the horror of the cover-up by ensuring that victims cannot simply be forgotten. The children murdered by William Afton and trapped in animatronics continue to exist, suffering and causing suffering. Their unrest a constant reminder of crimes that were never answered. The cover-up didn't just hide murders, it perpetuated them, preventing the resolution that might have allowed victims to find peace. The persistence of Fazbear Entertainment, despite everything, speaks to uncomfortable truths about institutional. Companies can survive scandals, disasters, and even demonstrated patterns of lethal negligence. Brand recognition, accumulated capital, and corporate legal structures protect institutions in ways that individuals can never achieve. The franchise's continuing existence as a business enterprise mirrors real-world examples of corporations that have caused enormous harm and continued operating. Yet the cover-up also demonstrates the limits of concealment in an age of networked information and collaborative investigation. The community that is assembled around Five Nights at Freddy's has collectively uncovered a story that no individual could have pieced together alone. The shared investigation of the franchise's lore represents a model for how distributed attention can penetrate secrets that centralized institutions cannot protect indefinitely. For those who have followed this journey through the complete history of Fazbear Entertainment's deception, I hope you found it as illuminating as it has been disturbing. The franchise offers not just scares, but also an extended meditation on how evil operates within institutional contexts, how cover-ups function across time, and how truth can eventually emerge from even the most thorough concealment. Thank you for spending this time with Archive Between Worlds. If this deep dive into Fazbear Entertainment's dark history resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss future explorations of gaming's most intricate lore. Leave your own theories and observations in the comments below. The community investigation continues, and your insights might reveal connections that others have missed. Remember, in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, the truth is always lurking somewhere in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look. Keep investigating, keep questioning, and never accept the official story at face value. Until next time, stay safe in the darkness. No exploration of Fazbear Entertainment's cover-up would be complete without examining Remnant, the mysterious substance that bridges the gap between mechanical engineering and supernatural horror. This element of the lore represents perhaps the most deeply buried secret of all. Knowledge that William Afton pursued through decades of murder, while the company that enabled him pretended nothing unusual was happening. Remnant, as described through various games and supplementary materials, is the substance that allows human souls to bind to physical objects. When children were murdered and their bodies stuffed into animatronics, something transferred from their dying forms into the machines that contained them. This something, this spiritual residue, gave the animatronics a form of life that transcended their mechanical programming. They weren't merely malfunctioning robots. They were vessels for tortured spirits seeking justice or simply trying to understand what had happened to them. William Afton's interest in Remnant appears to have evolved over time. His initial murders may have been driven by impulses we don't fully understand, the kind of dark urges that create serial killers in reality. But at some point, he began to recognize that his victims weren't simply dying. They were transforming. The children he'd killed were becoming something new, their spirits persisting in ways that defied natural law. This recognition shifted his focus from murder as an end in itself to murder as a means of harvesting supernatural resources. The blueprints visible in various games reveal that Afton designed the Funtime animatronics with remnant harvesting in mind. These machines weren't just meant to kill children. They were meant to capture something from those children in the process of killing them. The scooper device at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, which could extract the endoskeleton from an animatronic, may have been designed to work with remnant-infused components.
separating spiritual contamination from mechanical housing for further experimentation. Fazbear Entertainment's official position on Remnant appears to have been complete denial.
No public documents acknowledge the supernatural phenomena occurring within company properties. No safety protocols address how to handle possessed equipment.
No corporate communications discuss the spiritual dimension of their products. This denial may have been deliberate concealment of knowledge that executives possessed, or it may have been genuine ignorance maintained through willful blindness to evidence that contradicted materialist assumptions.
The cascade of fires that recurs throughout the franchise suggests that someone understood Remnant's vulnerabilities. Fire appears to be one of the few forces capable of truly destroying Remnant-infused objects, of freeing the spirits trapped within. Henry's final plan centered on burning the remaining animatronics, precisely because he understood that simple physical destruction wouldn't suffice.
The spirits needed to be released through flames hot enough to break the bonds holding them to their mechanical prisons. The transmission of William Afton's consciousness into digital form, becoming Glitch Trap, suggests that Remnant's properties may extend beyond physical objects into electronic systems. If souls can bond with animatronics, perhaps they can also bond with circuit boards, with computer networks, with virtual reality environments. This expansion of Remnant's domain represents a terrifying evolution of the original phenomenon, one that Fazbear Entertainment apparently triggered through their VR development process without understanding what they were unleashing. One of the persistent mysteries of the franchise concerns the leadership and ownership of Fazbear Entertainment across its various incarnations. William Afton and Henry Emily founded the original operation, but subsequent decades saw closures, restructurings, and apparent complete dissolutions followed by unexpected resurrections. Understanding who has controlled the company at various points helps illuminate how the cover-up persisted across leadership transitions. The original Fredbear's Family Diner appears to have been a direct partnership between Afton and Emily.
Their collaboration brought together Emily's engineering genius and Afton's business acumen, creating a small but successful venture that would grow into something much larger. When tragedy struck and the partnership began to fracture, decisions about how to proceed would have reflected both men's priorities, with Emily eventually withdrawing and leaving Afton to shape the company's direction.
The expansion into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and the formal creation of Fazbear Entertainment as a corporate entity suggests outside investment and more complex ownership structures. A venture of this scale would have required capital that likely came from investors who may not have known the full truth about what they were funding. These investors would have had financial motivation to see the brand succeed, potentially creating pressure to suppress any scandal that threatened returns. Following the missing children incident and subsequent closures, someone made the decision to continue the brand rather than dissolving it entirely. This decision, given the circumstances, reveals priorities that valued brand equity over moral considerations. Whoever controlled Fazbear Entertainment at this point chose to attempt rehabilitation rather than accepting that the company should end. The pattern would repeat after each subsequent disaster, with someone always finding reason and resources to continue. The help-wanted era suggests that Fazbear Entertainment had transitioned to new leadership entirely disconnected from the original founders. Both Afton and Emily were ostensibly dead by this point, yet the company continued operating, developing new products, and actively managing its reputation. This new leadership may have inherited the cover-up culture, without fully understanding its origins, continuing practices established by predecessors without questioning why those practices existed. The construction of the Mega Pizzaplex indicates access to substantial capital and corporate infrastructure. A project of this magnitude would have required investors, lenders, contractors, and partners, all of whom presumably conducted some form of due diligence before committing resources. That this due diligence didn't uncover disqualifying information about Fazbear Entertainment's history suggests either effective concealment
or widespread complicity in ignoring red flags. The gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's places in the role of night security guards, offering an intimate perspective on what it meant to work within the cover-up system. These characters weren't executives making decisions or investigators seeking truth. They were ordinary workers trying to survive jobs that turned out to be far more dangerous than advertised. Their experience illuminates how cover-ups affect people at the ground level of corrupt organizations. Mike Schmidt, the protagonist of the first game, took a job that paid barely above minimum wage for 5 nights of work. The job posting he responded to presumably didn't mention that previous guards had died, that the animatronics actively hunted humans after hours, or that the building contained the decomposing remains of murdered children. He learned these things through experience and through Phone Guy's recordings, accumulating knowledge that the hiring process had concealed. Mike's decision to continue working, despite discovering the dangers, raises interesting questions about complicity and choice.
After the first night's revelations, he could have quit, reported his experiences to authorities, or gone to the media with what he had witnessed. Instead, he returned night after night, surviving through skill and eventually being fired for tampering with the animatronics.
His participation in the system, even as a victim of its dangers, made him part of the institutional silence. Jeremy Fitzgerald's experience in Five Nights at Freddy's too paralleled Mike's, but with additional complications. Working during an active criminal investigation, Jeremy witnessed evidence of wrongdoing that should have contributed to exposing the truth. The someone using the yellow suit in the back, presumably William Afton continuing his crimes, represented ongoing danger that Jeremy apparently reported through official channels.
Yet the investigation led nowhere, and Jeremy himself may have become a victim of the bite of 1987. Fritz Smith, who worked a single night before being fired, represents the guards who didn't last long enough to learn the full scope of what was happening.
His firing for tampering with the animatronics and odor suggests that he discovered something wrong and tried to investigate, only to be dismissed before he could pursue it further. The rapid turnover of night guards served the cover-up by preventing any single person from accumulating enough knowledge to become dangerous.
The night guard of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 faced different circumstances working at Fazbear's Fright during its brief existence. This guard encountered Springtrap, the most explicitly dangerous animatronic, and witnessed firsthand that the horror attraction contained genuine horror.
The fire that destroyed Fazbear's Fright may have been this guard's attempt to end the threat permanently, an act of resistance against the cover-up that exceeded anything previous guards had attempted. Throughout the franchise, we encounter suggestions that not every potential victim became an actual victim.
Some children apparently sensed danger and avoided it. Others were present during incidents, but survived.
These near misses reveal both the extent of threat that the cover-up concealed and the resilience of some who encountered that threat. The crying child, before his death in the bite of 1983, displayed intense fear of the animatronics that went beyond normal childhood nervousness. His terror, manifested through constant crying and desperate attempts to avoid Fredbears, might have been intuition about genuine danger. The minigame showing his experiences suggest he may have witnessed something at the restaurant. Perhaps one of his father's crimes that gave him reason for fear that adults dismissed as irrational. Gregory, the protagonist of Security Breach, survived a night in the Mega Pizzaplex through determination, quick thinking, and assistance from Glamrock Freddy. His success where so many others failed demonstrates that escape from Fazbear's horrors was possible, if extremely difficult. The various endings available in the game explore different routes to survival, suggesting that multiple paths out of the nightmare existed for those clever or lucky enough to find them.
Cassie in the Ruin DLC represents a more ambiguous case. Lured into the destroyed Pizzaplex by what she believed were distress calls from Gregory, she discovered that the messages were faked by the Mimic.
Her fate depends on player choices and ending routes, but her initial survival through the facility demonstrates that even in its ruined state, navigating Fazbear's dangers remained possible with the right approach. The existence of survivors challenges the totality of the cover-up. People who escaped encounters with dangerous animatronics, who witnessed evidence of crimes, who experienced the supernatural phenomena firsthand, would carry knowledge that threatened official narratives. The cover-up had to account for these witnesses, either silencing them directly, discrediting their accounts, or relying on the sheer implausibility of their stories to prevent them from being believed. As we reach the end of this examination of Fazbear Entertainment's cover-up layers, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but at a waypoint. The franchise continues to develop, new games continue to release, and new revelations continue to emerge. The investigation into what really happened at Freddy's remains active, pursued by a community of players who refuse to accept official narratives. The cover-up we've explored extends across multiple dimensions: corporate, personal, supernatural, and metatextual. At its foundation lies the simple horror of child murder, crimes that should have been investigated and prosecuted, but were instead hidden through institutional complicity. Layered atop this foundation are the supernatural consequences of those murders. Possessed animatronics and restless spirits that the company denied while knowing they existed. Above that sits the corporate machinery of concealment, the strategies of denial and deflection that protected the brand at the cost of justice. And encompassing all of it is the meta-narrative dimension, where games within games blur the line between fiction and reality, cover-up and revelation. For those who love Five Nights at Freddy's, this complexity is part of the appeal. The franchise offers not just scares but mysteries, not just gameplay but investigation, not just entertainment but engagement. Scott Cawthon created a universe that rewards attention, that hides truths in plain sight, that challenges players to look deeper than surface appearances suggest. The cover-up is both the villain of the story and the structure that makes the story possible. For those encountering this information for the first time, welcome to the investigation. The resources for exploring further are vast. Wiki articles documenting every detail, theory videos analyzing every clue, community discussions debating every interpretation. The truth about Fazbear Entertainment is scattered across games, books, and supplementary materials, waiting to be assembled by those willing to put in the effort. And, for Archive Between Worlds, this represents exactly the kind of deep lore exploration that defines this channel. The darkness beneath the surface, the stories hidden in details, the secrets that corporations would rather we never discover. These are the territories we map together, finding meaning in the shadows that mainstream attention overlooks. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for investigating alongside me. If you've made it this far, you're clearly committed to understanding the full scope of Fazbear Entertainment's deception, and that commitment deserves recognition. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like to help the algorithm share this content with other investigators, and drop your own theories in the comments. Every perspective adds to our collective understanding. The cover-up continues. The investigation continues. And we continue together until the truth is fully revealed. Stay curious. Stay vigilant. And whatever you do, keep your doors closed after midnight. For those who wish to reference the chronology of cover-up events discussed in this exploration, here is a consolidated timeline of the major incidents and their corporate responses. The 1970s saw the founding of Fredbear's Family Diner by William Afton and Henry Emily. The development of Springlock technology created both entertainment innovation and future danger. The early years appeared successful, establishing the foundation for what would become Fazbear Entertainment.
In 1983, the bite of 1983 occurred when the crying child was killed by Fredbear's malfunctioning jaws.
Charlotte Emily was murdered by William Afton outside Fredbear's family diner. The company's response included closing Fredbear's, retiring Springlock suits to safe rooms, and rebranding around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The year 1985 brought the missing children incident on June 26th. 5 children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, were murdered and stuffed into animatronics.
A suspect was arrested but released. Blood and mucus were observed around animatronic eyes and mouths.
The health department threatened shutdown. The company's response involved minimal acknowledgement, allowing investigations to fail, and eventually closing the location while planning reopening. In 1987, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened with toy animatronics. William Afton continued using the yellow suit for crimes. The bite of 1987 occurred, leaving a victim without their frontal lobe. The corporate response restricted animatronics to nighttime roaming and closed the location shortly after. Sometime in the late 1980s to early 90s, Circus Baby's Pizza World was developed by Afton Robotics. Elizabeth Afton was killed by Circus Baby. The venue closed before public opening, officially blamed on gas leaks. The Funtime animatronics were moved to an underground rental facility. Around 1993, the final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location operated as depicted in the first game. Night guards experienced animatronic attacks. The location eventually closed, and the building was abandoned. At some point in the 90s, William Afton returned to the abandoned pizzeria, dismantled the animatronics, and was killed by Springlock failure in the Spring Bonnie suit, becoming Springtrap. The safe room was sealed, and his body remained hidden for approximately 30 years. In 2023, Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, opened. Springtrap was discovered and brought to the attraction. The facility burned down, though Springtrap survived. The events of Pizzeria Simulator followed, with Henry Emily establishing a trap location. Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, Lefty, and Scrap Trap were salvaged. Henry initiated a fire that destroyed all animatronics, supposedly ending the nightmare. In the modern era, Fazbear Entertainment commissioned the VR game that became Help Wanted. Glitch Trap emerged from scanned circuit boards. Vanessa was corrupted. It became Vanny. The Mega Pizzaplex was constructed. At least 9 children disappeared at the Pizzaplex. The events of security breach occurred. The Pizzaplex was damaged but not destroyed. In the post-security breach period, the Mimic emerged as a threat in the Ruin DLC. New games continue to reveal additional layers of the cover-up. The investigation, both in-universe and in our world, continues. This timeline represents our current understanding, subject to revision, as new information emerges from future games, books, and community discoveries. The truth about Fazbear Entertainment remains partially obscured, waiting for dedicated investigators to bring it fully into the light.